Good morning, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to another podcast of Two Tokens. This is about the topic power to the many in Europe. So I'm really happy here that I'm in the presence of two gentlemen from that traveled quite a bit. But you can tell a bit how that went, Alex and Andrea. And I think we're going to have a conversation about what your observations are about what's going on in Europe and what your contributions are. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Michel Chatelin. I'm a lawyer based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I'm involved with Two Tokens in the energy use case working group, where we're working on fractionalized ownership and tokenization of kilowatt hours. We have a project going on that we can talk about a bit more later. So I'm really honored to have you guys here. But perhaps I can ask Alex to introduce himself first to see who you are, what you do, before we jump into the topic of today.
Okay, hi Michelle. I'm Alex Delia, president of Prosume, and I'm in the Two Tokens group since a couple of years. Was following the energy token working group for the power to the many, and yeah, happy to be in Delft.
Great to have you here, Andrea.
Good morning, Michelle. Thanks for the invitation. I am Andrea D'Intino, co-founder of Forkbomb BV. We are technology providers, focusing primarily on cryptography and everything that goes around it. So we've been into tokens for a couple of weeks now. We are newcomers. Our contribution to the energy sector within the Two Tokens scenario is focused mostly on tokenization and identity.
Okay. All right. So in order to paint a little bit context for people that are listening for the first time, I think before we jump into the details, if we talk about the energy sector, particularly if we talk about the energy sector, I think we're talking about electricity and perhaps gas, all the networks. I mean, as a general introduction, the challenges we're facing in Europe at the moment is, on the one hand, this drive through liberalization of the energy markets, where we have the final leg, meaning that we should come towards a situation with more distributed energy, where we're replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources, in particular wind and solar, which gives us challenges in terms of how to deal with the intermittency of the availability of that renewable energy source, which has an impact on the grids. And I think as a general notion, the challenge lies there in one hand to how are we managing the public grids from high voltage, mid voltage levels. So basically the job of the grid operators, but at the final end of the grid, so the lower voltage parts where the small consumers are, like all of us are situated. You see more people producing their electricity there. There's a huge increase of devices that are able to communicate eventually that demand electricity, or people are producing electricity. And at those ends of the grids, we have to make sure that demand and supply will be matched, which creates challenges for who will do what. And then, of course, the last 2 years we were confronted with the Ukraine war and the fallout of that, which had a huge impact on energy prices, which I think, increases the demand for solutions that will stabilize electricity prices. So how you make sure that energy stays affordable for the consumer at the end of the day. So the final end of grid is what we call distributed energy. What happens there? So perhaps my first question would be, within that context, where do you see the biggest challenges that you are focusing on yourself? So, Alex, do you want to take that away?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you said it right. I think that decentralization is the key issue here. And maybe also it's a really good solution to tackle these problems we have nowadays. I think actually these are things we should have done long before. We should have started decentralizing energy sources long before, so 20 years ago. We wouldn't find each other in this situation, I think, in my opinion. And I think the issue is related to the fact that we know already, I think you discussed it in other podcasts, we can see it all around. I think now it's a common word, the fact that infrastructures were built centralized because of huge investment. You needed a lot of capital to build a big power plant back then, so you need a lot of money. And then so you were producing energy like in a big location and transporting it, as you said, then transforming it till the end user. But with decentralization, which is possible because sun and wind are everywhere equally distributed on the planet, so it's not a matter anymore of the source of energy, where you take the energy from, but how you transport it. And I think we already know that the best is to not transport it as much as possible, to use it locally. So that means that you need to have, in terms of infrastructure level, management on the microgrid level. And that means that if you manage it locally and you want to connect these, say, local bubbles together to balance the grid and answer to the demand that some user might have, because somebody might need more energy than the next guy, than the next neighbor, then you need to interface those actors not only on a matter of physical layer, but also on the matter of value. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think that these new technologies we have nowadays are coming in, and where this working group is also working at, the tokenization, because you enter into a level where you have many stakeholders, and these many stakeholders have different needs and different values. And this value can be balanced virtually, technologically, through this type of technologies. And yes, this implies legal aspects, of course, but also I think it implies nowadays, with the digitization of everything in the world, it implies a matter of identity, of privacy, of how you put together these stakeholders.
Yes.
And this is, I think, in my opinion, the most important thing nowadays. How this, because if you manage the identity and the value and you put them together in a microgrid, then I think you are solving the main issue, that is how much you balance what goes to whom.
Yes. We'll I think we should delve a bit deeper into that to make it to make it really visible for people what we're meaning. Let me first go to Andrea to just ask you an open question: what your perspective is on the challenges we're facing in this the future world of distributed energy. What kind of challenges do you see that you are working on? Which aspect?
Well, as I anticipated, we work on the technology side. While you were talking, I was asking myself, why didn't this happen 20 years ago, 15 years ago? And I think there are two reasons. First, until some 15, 20 years ago, most of the energy was produced by monopolists. I see the case, for example, in my home country in Italy. It was infamous that if you had the solar panel on your roof, you were allowed to produce energy, but you had to sell it to the monopolist, and then you could buy it back from them. And this has been true for until 10, 15 years ago?
No, even I think 5 years ago, still
Okay.
it was not that.
It's very, very recent.
Yeah.
So first there was a legal barrier. And while I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, I guess that the situation has been similar pretty much everywhere. Technologically wise, it would have been possible to offer fractional ownership of a wind turbine, for example, already 20 years ago. What I'm thinking is that newer technology such as blockchain and this whole trend of digital identity that is now going on both in Europe and the US with the eIDAS 2 regulation and the digital driving license in the US, those things combines lower the technological barrier to implement a solution that offers fractional ownership within a low entrance level for both security, easy of acquisition, and legal protection of the technological asset. So if you own 1% of a turbine, 20 years ago, we could have done it via a software application. We wouldn't have had a mobile application because mobile application only happened in the past 15 years, more or less. But we would have needed to have the paper counterpart of everything that happened on the digital side. Today, technology and digital identities help us to ease the burden. So this cuts the cost of implementing and deploying such a solution. Your question to me was about the challenges. So I didn't reply to your question. I believe that regulations. I mean, I am a tourist in this side of the of the industry, but I guess the regulation is one thing, and regulation is always tough. But what I know also is that we do need to have a higher degree of interoperability of networks within Europe. This is something I hear from the different perspectives. I know that if you produce electricity in a certain part of Europe, because of the infrastructure, very often you cannot distribute it further than a certain amount, both because of standards, so voltage and cables and stuff like that, but also because you're not able to transport the electricity for longer than a certain amount. So for every kilometer that you push the electricity further, it loses a little bit of strength. It's like if you have a long pipe of water and every meter it drops a little drop of water. There are efforts being made in all of these directions. There is a strong interest from the European Commission on the normative side, on the legal side. There is development being done on better energy transport infrastructure. There are also efforts being done in making the transmission network compatible across lands. I recently watched a TV program talking about someone had a dream, saying that solar power producing electricity in Sicily could power an EV car in Denmark.
Okay.
I guess that's the direction, but we need to do a lot of things until it happens. First, we need to have a cable that transports electricity from Sicily to Denmark, which is about 3,000 something kilometers, without a significant drop in power conveyed. Second, we need the legal framework for this electricity to travel from point A to point B. Third, we need to have the voltages and the frequencies and the cables harmonized so that the electricity can travel pretty much straight.
Yeah, I get your point on that challenge to create this European or international grid transporter as one of the major challenges we have. But let us try to unpack a bit the let's say the end of the challenges at the end of the grid, where we talk about distributed energy. I think Alex, you mentioned that we need to, let's say it in my own words, identify the actual new actors that are involved in making that possible. I mean, in the traditional sense, we would have either centralized or non-centralized producers. We would have, or generally, we have grid operators that have that are independent from producers and distributors, and then at the connection points, you would have suppliers or the traditional utility companies supplying their customers. And then what happened the last decade or so, that we have all these final customers that become active consumers, as we say within the European definitions, that start to produce themselves, and that opens up the opportunity for them to cooperate with other producers, either in an organized form, yes or no, and sell that combined production to another actor, so to say. So perhaps we can talk a little bit more specific. What type of new actors or what new roles for existing actors you see, and what challenges they face, and how technology can help to overcome those challenges.
Okay, thanks, Michel. I would like to connect to what Andrea said. I think it's more than a technical challenge. Is, as you said before, it would have been a paper challenge to put all of these actors together across Europe, identify them, and let them play, let them interact in this market. So I think that's really more, I would say, your bread in that sense, because until now you only had in the energy market the big players playing. And even more than, I think, a legal perspective in this sense, it's more a lobbying perspective, I would say, that smaller players were not allowed to play the game, to be in the market, in the energy market. And mostly that was because of guarantees you had to provide. If you are a big utility, as you said in Italy, for Enel, for example, you needed to buy energy, like, I don't know, 3 months before, reserve energy, also gas 3 months before. And for that, you needed to have guarantees that you would be able then to handle that amount of money.
Yeah.
And so you needed guarantees on the bank. You needed real money to be on a bank account. So a lot of euros. And if you have many small players that they can predict that they can produce energy, I don't know, for the next 3 days, for example, because with the new technology, you know how much wind and sun might be coming. And so you could define how much you use for yourself and you share to the other stakeholders of the local grid. But then you would need to provide a certain amount of guarantees again. And that's where I think that you would need all of this paperwork, because you would need to identify easily, and you cannot sign a document every day for doing that. You would need to say how much of this you would share to the community, and you would need to provide a sort of guarantee that might be limited. So I'm thinking that in this new market, we can have many stakeholders and prosumers enter a local energy market, because then the amount of money that could be transformed in tokens you would have to reserve as a sort of guarantee would be less, because you would need, for example, to provide a guarantee only for 3 days and not for 3 months. And through the blockchain, through the tokenization, you can say precisely, and you can track that precisely. So you can say, okay, I'm providing this amount of guarantees, and in the moment the energy is spread around and bought by my neighbor or by, I don't know, someone else in the market, this reserve is also burned. This reserve is consumed, and the settlement is happening immediately.
Okay, so I think if you talk, in my understanding, at the lower end of the grid, you would have what we talk about now are the active consumers, so that they become agents of their own energy hub behind the connection, just with all the appliances you have that use energy or perhaps also produce electricity if you have solar power. So it's all about managing that supply and demand at the final end of the grid as a consumer, and then trying to share the information or predict what your demand or supply will be in the next couple of days, because that's what your responsibility is in order to communicate it with the grid operators. And then on the other level, you would have sort of what we call the aggregators, so agents that are aggregating all these individual households, so to say, or active consumers, in order to be able to trade with that on the electricity market, if I can say it in that way. So there's lots of transactions that need to be placed. Lots of, you said, instead of paperwork, all these interactions, there's lots of transactions take place. So how can technology help in enabling all those transactions, Andrea?
Yes. So I was when I talked about the documental part of fractional ownership and of energy tokenization. I wasn't thinking of how big the paper trail would be. Once again, because that's not exactly my field of knowledge, but thinking about what you just said, for every transaction or every hour, every kilowatt I produce, I will need to sign something. And this is, it's simply impossible to keep track of the paper trail. You will need to do bulk contracts, which is complicated and brings risks to the table. With blockchain, well, with cryptography and blockchain on top, you can be mathematically secure that that piece of data was produced in that moment by that device and or signed by that person. So if you trust the device that is measuring the output of a solar cell, for example, then you can be sure that that day that solar cell produced that much amount of electricity, which makes it easier to keep track of all the energy that was moved and all the financial value that has to correspond to that produced energy. So let's say that before we would have needed an army of accountants to take care of all the transactions, both in the production, energy production and delivery side, and on the financial counterpart. And today you can have an army of devices that do the work for you, in the same way as in the 60s you had an army of people copying documents with a typewriter. Then Xerox arrived, and those were replaced by photocopy machines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also in the Börse, how you call it, in the stock market. You know?
Yes.
Having all this paperwork, all these people exchanging. I want to buy this, and
so who do you think should offer this technology? Is it something that, as an active consumer, you would simply buy, and in terms of an application that will then work for you, or because you also have to manage it in a way? Or are we going to have new parties or existing actors that will take that role? What's your take on that?
It depends, of course, on which level. If we talk about infrastructure, I'm an advocate of public infrastructure, so probably I'm saying something not really happy for the DSOs and the others.
Yeah.
I believe infrastructure should be public because they were built with public money most of the time and then privatized. And as it is on the street, you are free to walk on the street. You don't have to pay every time you move a foot on the street. So I am an advocate of public infrastructure, but the services, those are in the market. They can be sold by providers or whatever. And I think that end users, they don't want to get in the mess of understanding or signing a document every minute or understanding how these things work or which device to buy or not. I mean, they want to have an easy life. So I think that what is happening nowadays is more or less the same. It happened, as you said, in 2007, that we had mobile devices coming out, people starting to use these mobile devices we know they are aggregating many services, a camera, a phone, and whatever. And the infrastructure was not ready because we were running on edge connectivity. And nowadays we can do a lot of things through mobile network. But what was pushing this uptake was not the infrastructure or the provider itself, but were the end users, the consumers. They wanted to use these mobile devices easily and have fast connectivity. And so the providers had to adapt. And in this sense, I think that also in energy, end users want to be, so if we want them to, the prosumers, to be part of this new market, then we have to make their life easier. And so who provides the devices? I mean, anyone, because this is a service that could be sold. I think in the future will be integrated in the houses. We will not care about what device. We will rent a house and the house will be already, with the domotic as we already have nowadays. So everything will be already connected, cabled, and digitized. So you just will probably, what we will need is to have a sort of rent where you rent not only the walls and the ground, but you pay for the electricity and for the usage of it in a more fluid way. And for doing this, you need to have interfacing with this system somehow.
All right, so that sounds a bit like, let's say, automated homes that already have smart systems.
Yes.
But then that home as itself would act as an actor in the energy system.
Sort of, yeah.
But then those actors may want to cooperate. So you can aggregate either demand and supply of those actors. So who would take that role then in your view, or should take that
for
role?
The automation?
The aggregation of all the individual actors in order to be able... to clarify where that comes from.
Community, of course.
Because the challenge will be that in the lower grids you use the capacity as efficient as possible.
Yes.
So you will have a certain threshold that capacity should remain below. So somebody has to manage all that in order to be able to have that part of the grid meeting the thresholds that are set.
Community.
Who will take up that role? The community itself, but in what?
Yeah, but the community is made of many different stakeholders.
Yes.
Again, and all these stakeholders have to interface each other somehow, and that's where I think smart contracts are coming into play, because they can automate the process and the contracting layer really of the many stakeholders, and these many stakeholders relate in a local market, and this local market relates in the neighbor market, in the higher markets. Yeah. And that follows, of course, the transformation of energy also.
And that fits into the, let's say, the proposals to improve the electric market design, which the European Union came forward with after the issues we just talked about in the beginning, the Ukraine war and the challenge of high prices. And if I read those proposals, it's really reinforcing the possibility of these final consumers to organize themselves. So to individually or jointly become active on the energy markets, either it being for production or for storage or for exchanging all that. So you say the communities need to be or can be set up with small consumers, with small medium enterprises and local governments, and they can organize themselves in energy communities.
Anyone, yeah.
But you need a lot of know-how in order to be able to operate it. So it's easy to say, I think, that we have to activate the communities, but I think the main challenge is how are they going to be activated? They need to be made aware of, I mean, the technology challenges, but also organizational challenges, and in how far can technology help to organize those communities? Do you have a take on that?
So how would the technology be adopted by the people, or how?
Yeah, how can the technology really help to get those communities organized?
From my point of view, from the point of view of a software developer, that would be a UX UI challenge, meaning we will need to design the software in a way that it can be easily adopted by the users. There are standard rules and directions towards doing this. First of all, don't overload it with functionalities. So just keep it simple. Make sure that the software communicates what it does easily and that people can understand what's going on. I think that from the user's point of view, the main value proposition is saving money or earning money, depending if they are producers, consumers, or prosumers in what degree. If that part can be communicated efficiently and can allow the users to operate with the technology, then we have reached a good balance between the technological complexity and the fruitability.
And let me ask you guys first to come to an end of the podcast. Do you see any good examples where technology already is used to overcome those challenges? Or do we still have to design them?
Well, maybe not only in the energy sector, also in many other sectors, but I think it's when we come to digitization, I think it's, you need to connect all of these aspects together. So that's where I think, again, especially in Europe, we are trying to simplify this. And there are already communities growing around in Germany, here in the Netherlands, and also in Italy. But there are still these entry barriers for the end users. So I think this is what we really have to solve and simplify their life to enter. We are hearing a lot of energy communities talking in nowadays all over Europe. But I think that the real communities we are seeing are those which are on an island, where they, for some reason, had to be already a sort of community because they had no real connection to the land. So that's where we see something happening, in my opinion.
Andrea, something to add?
Yeah, I was thinking that there is already something similar that I've seen a bit everywhere in Europe, although it doesn't seem directly connected, but the economical model is very similar. There's been going on, startups came up and many of them succeeded, offering fractional ownership of flats. So you would actually sign up on a platform and say, I want to buy 5% of that flat for 10,000 euro. And you would own on paper 10% of the flat. Then someone would take care of renting the flat out, and the flat would produce a revenue, and you would then get a share of the revenue. It's even though the market is the industry is very different, the concept is pretty similar. And the same thing we could do with energy, with all sort of energies, both in buying a piece of a wind turbine that already exists, but as well as collecting money for the investment to plant one wind turbine. Those things could both be done, and I'm sure that there are other examples of fractional ownership of assets that produce revenue throughout different economies. There always been, but before you had to do it manually with a huge paper trail.
Yeah. So perhaps I think in order to come to a conclusion of this podcast, I think that where we are is that we're seeing the beginnings of enabling particular fractionalized ownership of assets. So communities bringing the money together in order to finance these assets. I think that's where we see examples all over Europe of how that's made possible. So it's also a good thing, democratizing the ownership of energy assets. But where the real challenge lies, and technology can help, but we still have a lot of work to do, is in order to be able to do something with the output of these energy assets. So the electricity produced, how to be able to share that within the communities, how to be able that members of the communities are organizing themselves and interacting with each other and perhaps with other communities with regard to the energy produced by them. I think that's where we have a lot of work to do, and hopefully with another podcast we can look at another aspect of it. For now, I would like to thank you both for sharing with us your insights, and would like the audience to thank for listening to us, and we'll continue the conversation in another one. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.